Welcome to the Real Free News Podcast. Today, our analysis examines the ethnic and tribal hierarchies within global Islamic social structures, focusing on the consistent subordination experienced by white European male converts across historical and contemporary contexts. A growing number of white Western men, alienated by the perceived emasculation of contemporary Christianity and secular liberalism, have begun to view conversion to Islam as a path toward restored masculine authority. The attraction rests on observable contrasts: polygamy, male-initiated divorce, a historical tradition of conquest, and a religious framework that appears to sanction aggressive self-assertion. Yet beneath the surface appeal lies a fundamental reality almost entirely absent from conversionist discourse. Islam, in its lived social and political hierarchy, functions as an Arab tribal supremacy system in which non-Arab converts, particularly those of European origin, occupy the lowest permanent rung. The universalist rhetoric of the Ummah obscures a persistent ethnic order that places Arabs, especially those claiming peninsular or Qurayshi lineage, at the apex, followed by other Middle Eastern and South Asian groups, with white European converts consistently ranked beneath even sub-Saharan African and Southeast Asian Muslims. This hierarchy is not a historical accident, but an enduring structural feature reproduced in every major Muslim society and diaspora community. Marriage patterns, mosque leadership, inheritance of religious authority, and informal prestige all follow the same gradient. The closer to the original Arab core, the higher the status, the further removed, particularly by European ancestry, the lower and more instrumental the position. The central argument of this analysis is that white European men who convert to Islam do not gain access to the privileges they seek. They voluntarily insert themselves into the bottom tier of an Arab-dominated racial tribal order whose core beneficiaries regard them as useful idiots at best and future slaves at worst. Far from offering a restoration of status, conversion transforms disaffected white men into the most expendable layer of a system designed to extract their labor, resources, and women while denying them any meaningful share of power or reproductive prestige. Part 1. The initial appeal and the mechanism of recruitment. White Western men drawn to Islam typically cite frustration with feminist family law, the perceived passivity of modern Christianity, and the apparent sexual and martial freedoms available to Muslim men. The promise of multiple wives, instantaneous divorce, and a religion of conquest presents itself as the antithesis of a civilization that punishes male initiative. Low-status non-Arab Muslims in Western countries, themselves near the bottom of the global hierarchy, serve as the primary recruiters, aggressively promoting conversion as the solution to Western male dispossession. These recruiters emphasize the theoretical universality of Islam while deliberately downplaying the ethnic stratification that governs actual power distribution. White converts are welcomed with elaborate displays of brotherhood, encouraged to marry quickly, often to women from the recruiter's own ethnic group, and positioned as defenders of the faith against hostile Western societies. The rapid integration serves a strategic purpose. White faces provide legitimacy, financial resources, and political cover for communities otherwise viewed with suspicion. The critical deception lies in the presentation of conversion as entry into a horizontal brotherhood rather than a rigidly vertical hierarchy. White men are led to believe that by pronouncing the Shahada they immediately acquire the same status and privileges enjoyed by Arab and Pakistani Muslims. In reality, they have merely been enlisted as the newest and lowest caste in a system whose upper tiers remain exclusively reserved for those of Middle Eastern and South Asian descent. Part 2. The ethnic and tribal hierarchy in practice. The lived reality of Muslim social organization reveals a clear and consistent ranking that places Arab lineage at the summit. Within this order, peninsular Arabs claiming Qurayshi or high tribal descent occupy the highest positions, followed by other Arabs, North Africans, Turks, Persians, South Asians, Southeast Asians, Sub-Saharan Africans, and finally white European converts who are almost universally positioned at the very bottom. This hierarchy manifests in marriage patterns, religious leadership, and the distribution of prestige and authority across both traditional Muslim societies and Western diaspora communities. Marriage practices provide the most unambiguous evidence of the hierarchy's operation. While men from higher-ranking groups routinely marry women from lower-ranking groups, including the daughters and sisters of white converts, the reverse almost never occurs outside tiny cosmopolitan exceptions. A white male convert seeking to marry an Arab or high-status Pakistani woman faces systematic rejection rooted in ethnic prestige rather than individual merit. Simultaneously, white women who convert or are born to convert families become highly desirable marriage partners for men from the higher tiers, effectively transferring European genetic material upward while blocking reciprocal exchange. Mosque governance and religious authority follow the same pattern. Leadership positions, funding control, and public representation remain overwhelmingly in the hands of Arab and South Asian networks, with white converts relegated to marginal roles or used as visible tokens for Western audiences. The consistent reproduction of this order across geographically and culturally diverse Muslim populations demonstrates that it is not an aberration but a structural feature of Islamic social organization. Part 3. Historical precedents of white subordination under Muslim rule. European populations that underwent mass conversion to Islam under Ottoman or earlier rule provide unambiguous historical evidence of the permanent subordination faced by white converts. Bosniaks, Albanians, Polacks, and Circassians retained their European phenotype but occupied secondary status within empires controlled by Turkish and Arab elites for centuries. None produced caliphs, grand viziers, or ruling dynasties from local stock while imperial structures endured. The Ottoman devşirme system, which forcibly converted Christian boys into janissaries, illustrates the dynamic most clearly. European origin provided desirable physical characteristics for military and administrative service, but political and reproductive power remained concentrated among Turkish and Arab elites. Even voluntary converts found their descendants gradually absorbed into lower strata, while core authority stayed with the original ruling groups. Only the collapse of imperial frameworks allowed limited autonomy, and even then within constrained territories under continuing cultural pressure from the Arab center. These historical cases establish a consistent pattern. White European converts serve as frontier muscle, tax base, and genetic reservoir for higher-ranking groups, but never achieve parity within the ruling structure. The contemporary situation differs only in form, not substance. White converts in Western countries function as political shields, financial supporters, and reproductive resources for Arab and South Asian networks advancing their own ethnic interests. Part 4. White converts as disposable instruments of Arab expansion. The ultimate function of white European converts within the contemporary global Muslim order is to serve as disposable instruments for the expansion of Arab and Middle Eastern interests. Their utility derives from their ability to legitimize Muslim demands in Western societies, provide economic resources, and facilitate demographic growth through mixed marriages that transfer European genetic material upward in the hierarchy. Once these functions are fulfilled, white converts become surplus population to be marginalized or eliminated. The grooming gang phenomenon in Britain exemplifies the dynamic most starkly. Predominantly Pakistani operations targeted white girls explicitly because they were regarded as legitimate spoils from an inferior population. White converts who protest such treatment discover that their new co-religionists view European ancestry itself as a mark of inferiority, rendering complaints evidence of persistent unbelief. The conversion that was meant to protect white families instead removes the final ideological barrier to their exploitation. The long-term trajectory, observable in both historical precedents and current diaspora patterns, points toward the gradual absorption or elimination of white converts once their instrumental value declines. As higher-ranking groups consolidate control over territory, resources, and reproduction, the position of European origin Muslims deteriorates into permanent dhimmi-like status or worse. The entire conversionist project thus reveals itself as a sophisticated mechanism for neutralizing potential resistance while harvesting the genetic and material resources of the host population. Conclusion: the hidden ethnic hierarchy white men face after converting to Islam revealed. The conversion of white European men to Islam does not represent integration into a universal brotherhood, but voluntary insertion into the lowest stratum of an Arab-dominated racial tribal hierarchy. Every privilege ostensibly available through conversion, polygamy, authoritative divorce, participation in conquest, remains effectively monopolized by higher-ranking groups, while white converts are systematically excluded from power and prestige. The universalist rhetoric serves as ideological cover for a structure that has consistently subordinated European populations under Muslim rule for centuries. The white convert who expects to share in the spoils of Islamic masculinity discovers instead that the spoils are distributed strictly according to ancient Arab bloodlines, leaving him with the obligations of the faith but none of the rewards. Historical and contemporary evidence demonstrates that white converts function primarily as disposable tools, providing legitimacy, resources, and genetic material to advance the interests of Arab and Middle Eastern core populations. Their labor finances mosques, their political advocacy shields higher-ranking groups from scrutiny, and their daughters and sisters become prestige acquisitions for Arab and South Asian men who would never reciprocate. The promise of restored masculine status collapses under the reality of permanent ethnic subordination. Rather than offering escape from Western emasculation, conversion delivers white men into a system whose ultimate objective includes their demographic and cultural erasure. Once the utility phase ends, the white convert is discarded, his lineage diluted, his authority nullified, his posterity absorbed into the service of a foreign elite. The persistence of this hierarchy across 14 centuries and every continent touched by Muslim rule indicates that it constitutes a core feature of Islamic social organization rather than a peripheral distortion. From the Ottoman Devserm to the modern grooming gangs of Britain, the pattern remains unbroken. European men are harvested for their strength and beauty, then neutralized as threats. White European men seeking restoration of authority must therefore recognize that no solution lies in adopting a religious framework whose global power structure is fundamentally hostile to their interests. Genuine renewal requires confronting the sources of dispossession within their own civilizational tradition rather than surrendering to a rival order that has historically transformed European converts into the most exploited layer of its imperial architecture. The choice is not between weakness and strength, but between rebuilding one's own house and volunteering to be the lowest slave in someone else's. The only path forward is ruthless clarity. Islam's Arab core has never granted, and will never grant, white men equality within its hierarchy. Every white convert who believes otherwise is signing his own death warrant, handing over his money, his daughters, and his future to men who openly regard him as racially inferior. The brotherhood is a lie, the privileges are reserved, and the endgame is erasure. Stay out, rebuild your own tradition, or accept your place as the permanent serf of an Arab empire that still dreams of the white slave markets of old. Final warning to white men. Listen up, you naive fools. Every white guy who takes the shida thinking he'll get 4 wives and a warrior's glory wakes up as the mosque's ATM and doormat. Arabs and their brown lieutenants laugh behind your back, marry your sisters, and groom your daughters while you pay the bills and defend the Ummah online. You are not their brother. You are their janissary, their useful idiot, their walking wallet. When they don't need you anymore, you're discarded like the Bosniaks and Albanians were. Converting to Islam doesn't make you alpha. It makes you the lowest slave in an Arab supremacist pyramid. Thank you for listening to the Real Free News Podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and tell us what you think in the comment section. Visit realfreenews.com for more Real Free News, and check out the Real Free News store for real free food and gear. Remember to keep it real, free, news, and we'll see you next time.